Hello everyone. In this video we are going to have a look on the questions that were asked for September 2020 Nta Ugc NET exam, and that too from the topic Victorian age. In the previous video we discussed about the 5 questions that were asked from Romantic period, and in this video we will be dealing with Victorian age. And before moving on with this video, let me first tell you both Romantic age and Victorian age are very important from NET point of view, and almost all the writers of both the periods have got equal importance. So there is no single writer or there is no single author that you can skip while you are preparing for your NET exam. So you have to look at the different authors who belong to these two periods, and also you have to look at the different things, different facts that revolves around them. So when we deal with the 8 or 9 questions that were asked from Victorian age for the past exam, we are technically looking at the different areas in which the questions can be asked about a particular author. So if you take a particular author, try to remember these facts about that particular man. Okay, so that's how we are beginning this video. So let's begin with a question. In September 2020, there was a question: which 2 poems in the following list are examples of dramatic monologue? Which 2 poems in the following list are examples of a dramatic monologue? And the examples are Alfred Lord Tennyson Ulysses, Philip Larkin Church Going, Carol Ann Duffy's Medusa, Catherine Phillips A Married State. Okay, and before answering this question, also keep this one thing in your mind, that for Victorian age writers or for Romantic age writers, they are equally important. And another thing is that for the past exam, that is for the September 2020 Nta Ugc NET exam, there were more than 10 questions from Victorian period. Okay, in this video we are discussing about the direct questions that were asked from Victorian age, but at the same time there were also questions like the arrange the following in chronological order that has works, titles and authors from this Victorian period. So Victorian period for the past exam, and not just for the past exam, Victorian age and Romantic age, both these ages are very important, and from a student perspective it is very simple to learn this. Okay, because the writers of this period are very limited and the works would be very familiar to you if you are a literature lover. So because of many reasons, both these periods, they sound familiar to the students, and therefore it is also easier to understand them and to learn them. Okay, and while you are getting into this Victorian age, here the question is about dramatic monologue. So have this in your mind as the first point. You have to look at the different techniques, different literary styles, different literary movements that became popular during the Victorian age, because Victorian age was actually the age where realism, naturalism and also the earlier forms of modern techniques became so popular, and this is also the period where such types of literary styles became popular. Dramatic monologue, it was not something that that was coined during the time of the Victorian age, but it became popularized during this time. So when you deal with a particular area, or while you are preparing for a NET exam and you are taking a particular period, then look at the important movements, important theories, important concepts and important literary styles that are popularized during that time. So here the question is about dramatic monologue. Alfred Lord Tennyson Ulysses, Philip Larkin Church Going, Carol Ann Duffy's Medusa, Catherine Phillips A Married State. So these are the options where you have to choose your option. So the correct answer is option 4. Let's go back to the question. The option 4, that is A and C. So here we have Alfred Lord Tennyson Ulysses. So you might be familiar with Tennyson's Ulysses. So Ulysses is technically written in the form of a dramatic monologue, where Ulysses is speaking about his wish to someone, some unknown listener, about his wish to travel and about his about how he disliked being regarded as a king. So we can say that Alfred Lord Tennyson's Ulysses is written in the format of a dramatic monologue. The second one is Philip Larkin Church Going. You will be more familiar with it, or you will understand it more clearly when we deal with what a dramatic monologue is. So we know about Philip Larkin. Philip Larkin's church going is about his meditation in a church which is actually an unknown church, okay, or not that time familiar or a used church. So Philip Larkin, we cannot say it is a dramatic monologue, because at that time the speaker, he is speaking to himself. There is no listener to him. Then Carol and Duffy's Medusa. Carol and Duffy's Medusa is again written in the form of a dramatic monologue. It was a work that appeared in 1999. You can find it's considered to be a finest example of dramatic monologue. And the final one is Catherine Phillips, A Married State. Now, this is also an autobiographical poem written by Catherine Phillips. But again, here the speaker, she speaks to herself. So, we cannot consider it as a dramatic monologue. Therefore, the answers are Alfred Lord Tennyson Ulysses and Carol and Duffy's Medusa. So, the option is option A and C. Sorry, option D, that is A and C. Then what is a dramatic monologue? A dramatic monologue is a poem written in the form of a speech of an individual character. Written in the form of a speech of an individual character. Two things that you have to remember here is that speech. Okay, it will always be in the form of a speech and also of an individual character. The form is associated with the Victorian poets, especially Robert Browning. Then M.H. Abrams notes the following three features of dramatic monologues as it applies to poetry. So these are the three. The first one is the single person who is patently not the poet utters the speech that makes up the whole of the poem in a specific situation at a critical moment. So the entire poem would be narrated or would be spoken by a particular character, and this character probably wouldn't be the poet. This person addresses and interacts with one or more other people, but we know of the auditor's presence and what they say and do only from clues in the discourse of the single speaker. Okay, for example, we wouldn't find any traces of these other characters through their appearance, but we would get a hold of them through what I speak, through what the speaker says. The main principle controlling the poet's choice and formulation of what the lyric speaker says is to reveal to the reader in a way that enhances its interest, the speaker's temperament and character. So, technically in this speech, the speaker would be narrating his temperament, what he wanted to reveal to the reader. Okay, so the auditor, it will always be absent, but the presence is always clearly marked. So these are the three characteristics of dramatic monologue, and from these 3 points it is very clear that the answers are Ulysses and Medusa, because for the rest of the thing we couldn't find the second and the first and the second properties of a dramatic monologue. The speaker, he is notably the poet and he speaks to himself, and there is no character outside, or there is no person apart from them while they are speaking. Then another important figure that you have to look at the Victorian age is Robert Browning. Just like what I said in the previous video, where you have 2 questions from Lord Byron, we also have 2 questions from Robert Browning for Victorian age. And just remember that this person or this author, it can be varied, but remember they have this weightage. Okay, I'm trying to tell you that you have to look at these writers very seriously, because if you skip one writer, then there is often a chance for you to skip 2 questions that are from the same author. So Robert Browning, we all know about him. He is known for his technique of dramatic monologue. He is known for employing irony, characterization, dark humor, social commentary, historical setting and challenging vocabulary and syntax. So if you have completed your PG, I am quite sure that any of the poems of Robert Browning would have been there in your syllabus. So you will be familiar with Browning. Browning is the most important poet, just like Alfred Lord Tennyson in the Victorian age. So in 1846 he married Elizabeth Barrett. She was also another poet, and he was regarded as a sage and a philosopher poet, and he had contributed to the Victorian social and political discourse. So let's look at the questions that were asked from Robert Browning. In September 2020, the question was, which 2 of the following poems are by Robert Browning? Which two of the following poem are by Robert Browning? So there are two ways in which you could answer the questions. Either identify the works written by Robert Browning or either identify the works written by other poets. Okay, for example, if you are familiar with the works of Robert Browning, it would be very simple for you to understand that he is the author of the poems, he is the author of the poems The Pied Piper of Hamelin and Two in the Campaign. At the same time, if you are familiar with the other writers like Alfred Lord Tennyson, then you would get an idea that Locksley Hall and the Lady Charlotte is written by Lord Tennyson. So this is another area in which the questions can be asked. You have to identify which among the following poems or which among the following works has not been written by this particular author. So you have to look at just look at the names of the different poems and works written by this Victorian writer. So just as I said, the answer is option 4, that is B and D only, because the Pied Piper of Hamelin and Two in Campagna, B and D, both of these poems are written by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Okay, in September 2020, there was this question: what does the titular Stebos in Robert Browning's Caliban upon Stebos refer to? So, Caliban upon Stebos is another famous work written by Robert Browning. So, we all know about Caliban. Caliban is a character that appears in Shakespeare's The Tempest. So, here Stebos is actually the god of Caliban, and the god is a very cruel, merciless god, and there are many critics who claim that this god, this merciless, brutal god, is actually a recreation of the mindset of Caliban. Okay, so here we have to identify who the Stebos is. The original name of Sycorax, Caliban's mother, the brutal god in whom Caliban believes, the name of the island in which Caliban lives, the monster who Caliban is afraid of, and the correct answer is the brutal god in who Caliban believes. Okay, so this character is very important because this actually points to intertextuality. Okay, Caliban is a character of William Shakespeare who appears in The Tempest. So Caliban and his mother Sycorax, they believe in this god called Stebos. So Stebos is a very brutal, a very cruel, cold god, and there are many critics, as I said earlier, who claim that this is actually the representation of what we believe. God is actually the representation of what we put faith in. Okay, so that is the answer, option 2. Then this is another great writer that you have to look while you are preparing for NTA exam. So here I have discussed almost 2 or 3 questions that were asked from Charles Dickens, but I have since we have already taken the classes on chronological questions that were asked in September 2020, we have seen that there were many questions that were asked from Charles Dickens. So we can say that for the past exam there were more than 4 questions, so there were almost 5 or 6 questions that were asked from Charles Dickens. So Charles Dickens is a very important writer when it comes to Victorian period, and also he has got a great weightage when it comes to NTA NET exam. So Charles Dickens, you have to look at almost every works of Charles Dickens. Okay, almost every works of Charles Dickens, then try to learn them in a chronological order, because there were chronological questions asked from Charles Dickens. So at first look at the different works of Charles Dickens, different novels written by Charles Dickens. Try to remember the publishing dates of these, publication years of this Dickens novels, and then try to have a knowledge of the summary, because Charles Dickens, his characters are very important. For NTA NET exam you can find many questions that were asked from the characters of Charles Dickens novels. So the name of the works, the year in which they were published, the characters, and also the plot line. So these are the 4 things that you have to cover while you are preparing for NTA NET exam and when you are dealing with Charles Dickens. So Charles Dickens, he was born in the year 1812 and he died in the year 1870. So this was one question, September 2020. Harold Skimpole is a character in Bleak House, Dombey and Son, Great Expectations, Oliver Twist. So these are all the novels of Charles Dickens. So if you are preparing for NET exam, don't stop at the name, don't stop after learning the names of Charles Dickens novels. No, you have to learn the name of the characters. The name of the characters are very important, just like the names of his works. Okay, so Harold Skimpole is a character in Bleak House, Dombey and Son, Great Expectations and Oliver Twist. So the answer is Bleak House. So Harold Skimpole, he is a character in Bleak House, and this question is somewhat relevant because this character Harold Skimpole is regarded to be a portrait of Leigh Hunt, another writer. Okay, you might be familiar with Leigh Hunt. So there were many critics who many critics who claimed that this was actually a very clear-cut portrait of Leigh Hunt. So Harold Skimpole, that is why this character is important. He is a very irresponsible, selfish, immoral and a character who has got no remorse for all his guilty doings. Okay, so Harold Skimpole, he is a character in Bleak House. In September 2020, there was another question from Charles Dickens where you have to identify or you have to match the characters of Dickens novels with its respective novels. So that's why I said Charles Dickens characters, they are very important. Just if you search for these characters in Wikipedia, you would find a separate pages for this. So that is the importance of these characters. So you have to identify the characters with their respective matches. Let's look at the characters individually. The first one is Miss La Creevy. So if you are familiar with in our LMS platform, we have completed almost all the novels of Charles Dickens. So go through the summary while you are preparing for it. Go through the summary, then you will get a clear-cut idea about the plot line, the themes and the important characters of Charles Dickens novels. So Miss La Creevy. La Creevy is a character in Nicholas Nickleby. Okay, it's a character in Nicholas Nickleby. So because she is the landlady of Nickleby. She is a landlady of Nickleby. She is a very kind-hearted girl, and she is one among the first person that Nickleby gets into contact with or gets into friendship once he arrives in the town, and that actually is a very true friendship. And at the end of the novel, you could find that she falls in love with Tim Lickenwater, and that's also a very good relationship. So that's how her kindness got repaid. Okay, so that's a character, Miss La Creevy, a character in Nicholas Nickleby. Then we have Miss Dolly. Miss Dolly is a character in Barnaby Rudge, and she is the daughter of the London locksmith Gabriel Warden. So she is also known as Dolly Warden. And she was the character with which Joe Willett at first was in love, and at the end of the novel you could find that they got married and they got settled down. So that's a character, Miss Dolly, who belonged to Barnaby Rudge. Then we have Mrs. Boffin. Mrs. Boffin is a character in Our Mutual Friend. Okay, is a character in Our Mutual Friend. So just remember, when you learn this, you have to understand each and every characters. Okay, for example, Our Mutual Friend, this is actually a novel, or this is actually the novel in which the first title of The Wasteland has got its name from. So you have to look at this intertextuality while you are preparing for this exam. So a character in Our Mutual Friend, Noddy Boffin's wife and a very motherly woman. And one important thing that you have to remember about Mrs. Boffin, or why Mrs. Boffin is important, is because she is one of the strongest women characters of Charles Dickens. Okay, so she is actually, rather than a girl who lives by the wishes of her husband and father, she is actually a woman who has got her own opinions, and also who undertakes an active role in social reform, because she is the person who convinced Boffin to take in an orphan boy called Johnny. Then we have the last character, that is Mrs. Flintwich. She is a character in Little Dorrit, who was first known as Afray. This is again a very fragile character of Charles Dickens, where she lives her life being afraid of her husband and her father, and both her husband and her mistress and his mistress. She hears the sounds of the building, all mysterious to her. So she is not that she's not that not at all a confident girl. She somewhat falls into these mysterious traps. So these are the different characters. Then you have to match the option. So let's look back at the question. So Barnaby Rudge, Little Dorrit, Nicholas Nickleby and Our Mutual Friend. And we have these characters, Mrs. La Creevy, Miss Dolly, Mrs. Boffin and Mrs. Flintwich. Okay, so we know Mrs. Flintwich, she is a character in Little Dorrit. Mrs. Boffin and is a character in Our Mutual Friend. Miss Dolly, she is a character in Barnaby Rudge and Mrs. La Creevy is a character of Nicholas Nickleby. Okay, so that is the way in which. So you have to remember that you should learn the characters. You should learn the name of the characters, and the thing is that none of these 4 characters are the protagonist of this work. Okay, they are all sideline characters or the characters like supporting roles who perform the supporting roles. So you not just look at the protagonist, but you have to understand the summary. Then it would be easier for you to answer these questions. Then again another question from a character of Charles Dickens. Mr. Pumblechook is a character in. So here you have to identify the character with its respective work. Little Dorrit, Nicholas Nickleby, Hard Times and Great Expectations. The answer is Great Expectations. So Mr. Pumblechook is a character in Great Expectations. He is Joe Garvey's uncle, an officious bachelor and a con merchant, and Pip, we can find that Pip dislikes Mr. Pumblechook for his pompous unfounded claims, but later their relationship actually has got many turns. Okay, so these are some of the questions asked from Charles Dickens. Okay, so before moving to the next area about Charles Dickens, for the previous year, these were not just the questions that were asked from Charles Dickens. We have got many chronological questions, but we have discussed it in the previous videos. That's why I'm not explaining it again. So Charles Dickens, look at the different works written by him, look at the characters of his novels, then also try to remember the years in which his works were published. September 2020. Another question was, to which of these boarding schools is Jane Eyre sent by her aunt Mrs. Reed? So with this question, one thing you might be very clear is that you have to look at the summary. Okay, I'm not asking you to read the summary. It would be very, very beneficial if you could read the novels because they are very enjoyable. But the thing is that you have to understand the plot line in order to answer this question. So for Victorian age, most of the questions are asked from the summary. So that's another reason why I have given detailed notes for all these writings apart from the videos, because it is very necessary for you to learn the characters and their actions when it comes to Victorian period. So the question is, to which of these boarding schools is Jane Eyre sent by her aunt Mrs. Reed? So this is from the novel Jane Eyre. You might be very familiar with it because this Lowood school, it's very, very famous here because it was not at all a good memory for Jane Eyre. So anyway, the answer is Lowood school. Then finally there was another question in September 2020, which of the following were published in the year 1859? So it might sound to be a very tough question for most of you, because you have to identify the 2 works that were published in 1859. So for that you have to know which of the works were published in that particular area. Again we can find a work of Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities, but just remember that all these works, they are very important to that particular period. So these are some of the years that you have to remember even if you are bad at remembering dates. So On the Origin of Species, we know it was published in the year 1859 by Charles Darwin. Tale of Two Cities, again published in the year 1859 by Charles Dickens. So from the very first example itself we could get the answer. On the Origin of Species and A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Darwin and Charles Dickens, they were both published in the same year, that is in 1859. And regarding the rest of the options, Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, it was published in 1865, and Silas Marner by George Eliot. Silas Marner is the 3rd novel written by George Eliot or Mary Ann Evans, and it was published in the year 1861. So the answer is option A and B only. Okay, so these were some of the questions that were asked from Victorian period. So have these things in your mind. At first, you should not skip any of the writers who belong to this Victorian age because they get equal weightage. Then if you are going for a writer, try to understand the biographical details of him, then go for the important novels or poems written by him, the important features of their particular works, and then the characters. You have to understand the plot line, okay, especially of the writer Charles Dickens. And another important thing is that you have to understand the literary styles, the movements like realism, naturalism, dramatic monologue. So such types of movements and such types of literary devices that were prominent during any particular period. So that's all for this video. Thank you.